When I was a kid, I played a ton of Smash Brothers. Each game was a pillar of my childhood, my teenage years, and adulthood, and helped create a ton of great memories with my family, friends, and even people I had never met before. In Super Smash Bros. Melee, they introduced this thing called a trophy. What would become a pivotal plot device in the sequel initially was just a cool collectible to celebrate Nintendo's history without having to cram in a bunch of new characters. This was one of my first introductions to characters that I had never seen before, and one trophy in particular always caught my attention. The Love Giant trophy portrays a large yellow giant holding what appears to be a villager of some sorts. The trophy description reads, "A reincarnation of the sun that appears on a solitary island in the South Seas. Doshin feeds off the emotions of the islanders to grow into a giant. The islanders named it for the sound of its heavy footsteps. Doshin. Its yellow color indicates its friendly nature. This Doshin likes to help with the villagers' daily tasks." I had never heard of this character before, and for obvious reasons. Melee itself notes that the game he appears in, Doshin the Giant, is Japan only. Creator Kazutoshi Iida would only release 3 games: Aquanaut's Holiday, Tale of the Sun, and Doshin the Giant. And today, we'll be exploring how Doshin came to be and why it was Iida's final game. This is the history of Doshin the Giant. Born in 1968, Kazutoshi Iida was influenced at a young age by Star Wars, punk rock, and perhaps the most important one, the space invader boom in Japan. As Iida attended art school and university, he was amazed by computer software and their graphical capabilities. Computers had started to become more commonplace, and after graduating from Tama Art University, Iida would go on to work for a company called Artdink. In the summer of 1995, a few weeks prior to the start of summer break in Japan, Artdink released a genre-bending artistic title by the name of Aquanaut's Holiday. One of the first games about nothing, the game is first-person, asking, not requiring, the player to explore the vast ocean with a minimal soundtrack as players discover new species and really do nothing. No enemies, no time limits, just exploration, discovery, and observance. Aquanaut's Holiday would be one of 3 games directed by Kazutoshi Iida, who said his intention was to create a game without a goal, a game that by itself is art, and a game that explored the transition from realism to abstract. Facing a game that you don't understand, but where you end up understanding yourself. This is the type of game experience I wanted to create. A year later, Iida would go the opposite direction with Tale of the Sun, a game inspired by the Great Hanshin earthquake, and people's strength in the midst of adversity. A game, quote, showcasing prehistoric men who were striving to survive. Much like Aquanaut's Holiday, the game focused more on exploration and giving the player freedom to do whatever they wanted. Iida expressed that, quote, "When I ask myself what is fun about video games, for me personally, it's the fact that pressing a button makes something happen. That's really what it's all about. You know what lies at the heart of it all, I thought, so I wanted to create a game that explored just that idea." After the release of these 2 games, however, Iida set out to create his own company, Param. In an interview with Next Generation magazine, Iida stated that he wanted to make games similar to Aquanauts and Tale of the Sun, stating, "I don't dislike the mainstream games. However, the games that are presently being made are only trying to match the needs of the majority, and that's boring. Game media has many possibilities, and I feel my job as an artist is to magnify those possibilities." Though he also admitted he does aim for mainstream appeal, which was the reason Iida started working on a new Nintendo 64 title. Iida offers an interesting view of himself as an artist and as a game designer. He tries not to, quote, force unreasonable rules and goals upon the players, end quote, and desiring to make games in peace. An artist, rather than a game designer, appears to be the primary goal for Iida, even saying, quote, "Just knowing that the attributes in my games are not typical, but wanting to call them games has been challenging." When presented with the next question, do you consider your games more like works of art or commercial products by the Next Generation staff, Iida responds with, "All of today's existing works of art are predominantly commercial products. That is a prerequisite. I don't think works of art and commercial products are mutually exclusive, and later notes that he doesn't think about the game's sales at all while making it, but also wishing it does well after he finishes it, likely to fund his ability to make more games. Finally, when he asks to give encouragement to younger game designers, Iida says, "My suggestion is to try everything. Make a game without precedent. That's what players are waiting for." This interview itself was a part of a Next Generation special titled Which Way to the Underground, a feature about independent music, films, and whether or not the games industry needed something similar. Instead of the same old corporations coming in and creating things, maybe it was time for newer, independent developers. One section from this feature confronts an early idea that games just aren't art, noting in the section that, quote, "most people still do not see games as a legitimate art form. Historically speaking, an underground movement is born from the frustration created by mass production tactics in an artistic field." And Iida appeared to be an early mind in that idea, that he wanted to make art, and games were his way of doing that. He even states a known truth for many creators who attempt to follow their passions. "Once I became successful, it was possible for me to personally control the production of my work without relying on game companies or their capital." Iida began work on his next title under the company Param. Param was founded by Iida, Takeo Kurabayashi, and Yana. Kurabayashi had previously worked with Iida on Aquanauts, and the team would be funded by Marugo, a joint venture between Nintendo and Recruit to solve the Nintendo 64's lack of Japanese third-party support. Iida and his crew at Param would work to design a new type of game, and having previously spoken about his admiration for Nintendo's creativity and intelligence, and his love for advanced concepts and techniques, the Nintendo 64, but more specifically the Nintendo 64 disk drive, would be the perfect opportunity. But why the 64DD? By the time the game was ready for release, the 64DD would not be making its way to the US, and it would be years after the 64's worldwide launch. According to Iida, originally, when I came up with the idea for Kyojin no Doshin, I thought that I needed a higher amount of storage space than ROM cartridges offered back then. I also needed bigger amounts of rewritable space because I envisioned an ever-changing game world. But with flash ROMs getting cheaper, the 64DD's advantages have really gone away. First shown off in Nintendo's Space World 1999, or Shoshinkai, Kyojin no Doshin had a, well, giant presence at the show, with a large Doshin inflatable balloon at the RandNet DD booth. According to Iida, a continuous line of people queued to use the 8 playable units and the large screen experience, a special demonstration event held 3 times a day, was a huge success. It was fantastic to see the captivated expressions of the young children, some of whom came on each of the 3 days, especially to play Doshin. During the project, we hadn't given much thought to the target market, but we were very pleased by its obvious attraction for children. In another interview prior to release, Masuyama, producer of the game, and Iida spoke on where the game came from, the idea being described as Populous meets Mario, and IGN64 would ask, "You already mentioned Doshin's 2 sides. Could you talk a little about the difference between yellow and red?" With Masuyama stating, "The basic premise is that red is bad and yellow is good," and Iida adding, "Human beings always have 2 sides, good and bad, or what we like to call build and scrap. We basically created the whole game around mankind's tendency to both create and destroy," with Iida explaining that, again, this is based on human behavior. Look at children, for example. Kids like to build stuff with wood blocks, but a moment later they will destroy their creation. After being asked about Doshin's abilities and his concept of the game, Iida would even liken it to Kurt Cobain of all people, saying, "It kind of reminds me of Kurt Cobain. When your charisma grows too big, you become destructive both to your surroundings and to yourself," likening the growth aspect of the game to another human condition. In-game, Doshin will gain hearts from the villagers after performing tasks like flattening land, planting a tree, etc., but as Doshin grows, you're more likely to step on inhabitants of the island or slip and fall, destroying what you may have helped create. IGN64 would then ask if he starts off with a philosophy such as too much love is bad, and whether or not that's the starting point, or if it's the gameplay, to which Masuyama calls Iida out a little bit. His background is fine art, he says. He doesn't call it a philosophy, but it's part of the concept, to which Iida responds, "I start off with a basic idea or concept and then write down a number of keywords. I also read a lot of books that I borrow from my producer that give me new inspirations. From there, I start to think about how to put all the elements into my game. After being asked whether he would bring Doshin over to a Western audience, IGN64 then asks, "What's your next project after Doshin the Giant?" To which Iida responds, "I'm not sure what exactly will happen with the 64DD in the future, but I think I want to continue to pursue Kyojin no Doshin projects on the DD for now. I still have a lot of ideas in my head." Kyojin no Doshin would hit Japanese store shelves in December 1999, only a few months after it was shown off at Space World. Exclusively for the Nintendo 64 disk drive, the game seemed to be a moderate success. Though there are no hard numbers, it was reported in an issue of 64 Dream that RandomNet had around 15,000 subscribers when Nintendo announced the discontinuation of the service in October 2000. Meaning that the total install base of the Nintendo 64 disk drive was probably around that number, as players needed to purchase the 64 disk drive directly through the RandNet service. Dream64 would also note in their issue that, simply put, it's a game where you freely control a giant on a southern island, but once you get drawn in, you can't stop. It has a mysterious addictive quality, like a drug. This is something you can never understand unless you actually play it. It's a shame that it can only be played on the 64 disk drive. The main gameplay loop involves the player taking control of Doshin, and according to Iida, it is a tropical-style up-and-down game. According to the RandNet website, an integral part of the fun of Doshin comes from manipulating the terrain on the game's southern island setting. The player starts each day as Doshin and is asked by the island villagers for help. The player can either pull up the terrain or lower the ground by jumping, hence the up and down gameplay loop. Iida felt that, quote, "Doshin itself has captured the fundamental pleasures of interactive media. Up and down, good and bad, these are the themes of the game. The player can control either Doshin or Joshin, labeled as the love giant and the hate giant respectively, with the push of a button. Each day lasts roughly 30 minutes, and since the game uses the 64 disk drive internal clock, time passes even when the player is not playing the game. For example, an unknown disaster could occur, causing settlements to go into decline. So the player must gain love or hate, help the villagers grow or destroy them, protect them from disasters like volcanoes, tornadoes, fires, monsters, and rain, and build monuments to reach the end of the game. Although it seemed to be a fun game, the install base for the 64 disk drive was so low that not many people had the chance to play it. The approach by Iida of making art and not really caring about how well they do makes sense in the grand scheme of it all though, since on June 30th, 2000, not long before the 64 disk drive was discontinued, an expansion to the game was released. Kyojin no Doshin, Kaiho Sensen, Chibiko Chiko Daishugo would require users to have Kyojin no Doshin, since you would flip back and forth between the games. The plot surrounded a little girl who dreamt of the Doshin 96 convention, trying to create pavilions for this convention. The player would have to switch back and forth between Kyojin no Doshin to create monuments, which would in turn create the pavilions. This expansion, however, was not directed by Iida, with Iida being listed as agitator in the credits. It would also have a lower install base due to the 64 disk drive itself, plus the fact that you had to own the original game. Although the 64 disk drive original nor its expansion were smashing successes, Iida himself stated in an interview that, quote, "The GameCube is a little too much," and further stated that their team was only 6 people strong, and developing a game for the GameCube, or Dolphin as it was known at the time, would be too difficult since development was only getting harder. Nintendo seemed to have other ideas though, and Kyojin no Doshin would land on GameCube in Japan and Europe in 2002, unfortunately never making it to the North American regions. Kyojin no Doshin, or Doshin the Giant for GameCube, retains much of the same gameplay loop and feel of the 64 disk drive exclusive, but this time has a few enhanced graphics, new areas, and a few tweaks to the gameplay. This version of the game was actually ported over from the 64DD by Giles Goddard, a programmer who had worked with Nintendo since Star Fox for the Super Nintendo, being one of the programmers alongside Dylan Cuthbert and Argonaut Software. Goddard would go on to help create the Super Mario Face demo, would help on Super Mario 64, as well as help program 1080p snowboarding. He would then leave Nintendo and begin working as a freelancer, with his first job being to help port Doshin the Giant. This version of the game was much more successful than its 64 disk drive counterpart, mostly because it wasn't stuck on an obsolete console add-on that was already dead on arrival. The game even peaked at number 1 and ended up being the 9th best-selling game of 2002 in Japan. Though the game would never make it to North America, it was held as a somewhat secret gem, with some either loving it or some hating it. Defunct Games reviewed it, saying, "I'm not kidding when I say this game is a lot of classic, pure fun, nicely strategic. The game is really addictive in its own simple way. I like the game the most out of all 64 disk drive games. So if you can overlook the somewhat slow controls and simple graphics, you'll keep coming back for more, so long as you don't go over the mystical and deadly edge of the world." Dylan Bloodworth of Nintendo World Report would give the game a 9 out of 10, saying, "If the game comes out in the US, buy it. If the game doesn't come to the US, mod your cube and buy it. It's that simple, really." What makes Doshin great, though, is that it's really determined by what you do and what your villagers demand at the time. Beyond the first day or two, experiences won't be duplicated very easily. One of my favorite moments, even if it was quite frustrating, was when my villagers had me build a towering plateau from a tiny island. I called it Mount Everest because the entire town was at the highest elevation you could possibly build, and unless I had grown significantly, it was far too steep for me to climb. It was a pain to take care of, but it really had a way of standing out. Needless to say, I'm really glad I imported Doshin. It's proven to be one of the most addicting games I've played in a while. The game does try to give you an incentive to stop by taking you back to the title screen at the end of each day, but it wasn't long before it sucked me in anyways. And now, over 20 years after its release, I found myself staring at a physical copy of the game at my local game store. Kyojin no Doshin. The only reason I recognized his face was because of Melee, and now I have the chance to experience the game for myself. What I found upon my initial playthrough was a game that was genuine, a game that didn't ask much of the player, only that you try to enjoy yourself. I found myself engulfed, playing day after day, flipping between Doshin and Joshin on a whim, and thoroughly enjoying myself. Only ever hearing about it as a quirky 64 disk drive game, Doshin the Giant seems to represent more than that, not only to me, but to Iida. Kyojin no Doshin would end up being Iida's third and final game. Apparently, from the moment I decided to make video games, I set myself a rule that I would create 3 titles. I don't know why it was exactly 3. Doshin the Giant was my last title. Once Doshin released, Iida didn't really do much else in the gaming industry. He'd be credited a few times as a special thanks and seemed to help others develop games, but he stopped directing entirely. Instead, he would go on to teach at Ritsumeikan University. He says in an interview that he has 2 main tasks while teaching, those being teaching what he learned in the gaming industry and what enters the domain of art. And the second is finding what excites people. He asks, "When we play a game, it is because we find it entertaining, isn't it?" "Be a giant. Do what you want," is the game's official slogan. Do what you want is an idea that Iida started exploring in Aquanauts. First, a game with no clear objective, you just do what you want. Then, a game where you control your own destiny, trying to survive and strive as a caveman, but ultimately still doing what you, the player, and you, the person, want. Finally, a god game, where you are quite literally a giant and can do what you want, both in a literal sense and a metaphorical sense. Yes, there is an objective, helping or hurting the villagers, and an ending to Doshin. But the game doesn't push you to do either. It's completely up to you, the person, whether you want to help or hurt. In a review from Cubed 3, sadly, after prolonged play, it is easy to get bored with the growing process and to rush in as Joshin and destroy something in order to gain hatred and height faster. And I think this perfectly encapsulates Iida's concept of the child. Maybe you will get bored and decide to destroy everything right after you built it. That's the nature of being in complete control of things sometimes. Even during my playthrough, I couldn't help but notice, looking back through my footage, how this childlike metaphor played out. It's as if I was bored, and maybe I was, of being nice. All of a sudden, I turned into Doshin and just destroyed a village. Why? I couldn't tell you, but I'm sure it's something Iida would have wanted to observe. Iida didn't set out to make a hit or a system seller. Not with Doshin, not with Aquanauts, but he set out to make 3 things. 3 separate attempts to understand what it means to be human through play, through entertainment. What makes it entertaining? This is something I deeply think about, says Iida. What is it that defines the human? Why does he need to be entertained? Do we create that entertainment? This is what I want to know. There's something profound about a person who looks at the entire medium that is video games, attempts to answer that question through his games, and then walks away from it all. A rule he created, an arbitrary rule, stopped him in his tracks. But maybe that's one of the most human things of all. To create, to leave it in the world, and to let other people decide what to do with it. Be a giant. Do what you want. Thank you all for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed a little bit of a shorter video on the history of Doshin the Giant. This video really was sparked by me just finding the game at my local game store. Again, I had heard of Doshin the Giant while playing Super Smash Bros. Melee, but I had never played it myself. Thought I'd give it a try, fell in love with it, and decided to make a quick little video on it. If you enjoy what I do and want to support this channel, make sure to hit that like button, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. But also, please be sure to check out my Patreon and check out my Ko-fi in case you want to support the show in any monetary way. I appreciate all the support that you guys do give me, and this channel would be nothing without you all. Thank you, and I hope you have a great day.